The dry cleaning receipt was stapled to the wrong suit, and the name printed across the top belonged to a man whose career I had destroyed 16 years earlier. I was 68 then, retired from the Dayton Herald, and living alone in the same Ohio suburb where my wife, Marlene, and I had raised 2 children. I had taken my only good suit to be cleaned for a newspaper awards dinner. The next afternoon, I unzipped the plastic bag and found a gray jacket instead of my navy one. The receipt said, Elliot Crane, press only, pick up Friday. I sat on the edge of my bed, holding that little piece of paper while the ceiling fan clicked above me. Elliot had been my closest friend for almost 20 years. We had covered factory strikes, school closings, floods, elections, and the slow death of downtown retail. Then, in 1994, I accused him of stealing the most important story I ever wrote. He resigned before the publisher could fire him. After that, he disappeared. Not literally. He was an adult man with a car and a social security number. But he left Dayton, stopped answering calls, and never published under his own name again. People said he had moved west, then south. Somebody heard he was teaching. Somebody else heard he was sick. I never checked. That is one of the uglier truths about being certain you were wronged. You stop asking questions that might disturb the comfort of your anger. The receipt was dated that morning. The dry cleaner was 4 miles from my house. Elliot Crane was not somewhere west or south. He was close enough that our suits had been placed on the same rack. I met Elliot in 1976, when newspapers still had smoke in the newsroom and editors believed shouting improved grammar. He was 29. I was 32. He covered City Hall, and I covered cops until a managing editor decided I looked too nervous around dead bodies and moved me to features. Elliot wore cheap brown suits and kept a yellow legal pad folded into his back pocket. He listened longer than most reporters. That was his talent. People told him the second thing, the thing they had not planned to say. I was better at structure. Elliot brought back a notebook full of human mess, and I could turn it into 12 clean inches before deadline. We became partners without anyone assigning us. Marlene liked him too, not romantically. I want that understood. She liked the way he entered through the kitchen door, without knocking, and repaired whatever he noticed was broken. A loose cabinet hinge, a porch light, my habit of taking myself too seriously. You know what your trouble is, Ben, he once told me over dinner. I assume you're about to. You think every silence is waiting for you to fill it. Marlene laughed so hard she had to put down her fork. The story that ended us concerned the Haven Street Youth Center. Haven Street housed teenagers a county had nowhere else to put. Runaways, foster children between placements, kids who had done small things adults described with large words. A former employee told Elliot the director was using isolation rooms as punishment. No books, no clocks, sometimes no meals. The county denied it. Elliot worked the story for 6 months. Then an unsigned draft appeared on my desk. It was brilliant, careful, restrained, impossible to dismiss. I rewrote it over one long weekend and published it under my name. 3 days later, Elliot walked into my office, placed his legal pad on my desk, and said, "You used my reporting." I told him the draft had no name. He said, "You knew the voice." I did. That was the part one could never explain away. At the dry cleaner, the clerk was a college-age girl with silver rings in both eyebrows. She checked the number on my receipt and disappeared behind a moving rack of clothes. She returned with my navy suit. "I'm sorry," she said. "The tags got switched. Has Mr. Crane picked up mine?" She looked at the computer. "Not yet. Do you have his phone number?" "I can't give that out." "I understand." I did not leave. She watched me for a moment. "Are you family?" "No, friend. Once." That answer seemed to matter to her. She wrote something on the back of my receipt and slid it across the counter. "I did not give you anything." It was the number of a downtown hotel. I called for my car. A man answered on the 5th ring. "Hello." The voice was older, rougher, but it was Elliot. For a second, I was back in the newsroom hearing him ask whether I had cut the best quote from his city budget story. "Elliot." Silence. Then he said, "Ben Mercer? You sound surprised." "I'm trying to decide if I am." I told him about the suits. That figures, he said. We always did look better in each other's work. It was a sharp line, but he sounded tired after saying it. Can we meet? No, I have your jacket. Leave it at the desk. I want to talk about Haven Street. The silence changed. You had 16 years to want that. I know. No, Ben. You know the number. That is different from knowing the time. He hung up. I drove home with his gray jacket hanging behind me at a red light. I glanced back and noticed inside breast pocket had been repaired with dark thread. The stitch was crooked. Marlene used a sew like that. She had been dead 9 years. I told myself many women sewed badly. Then I found the tailor's mark under the repaired pocket. MM. Marlene Mercer. My wife had mended that jacket. I knew because she used to sign repairs with her initials when the children were young. A joke left over from her mother's alteration shop. Shirts, coats, Halloween costumes. MM in tiny blue thread, where nobody would see it. Elliot's jacket had been repaired before Marlene died. That meant he had seen her after leaving Dayton. I called my daughter Rachel. She was 41, a physical therapist in Cincinnati, and had inherited Marlene's ability to hear dishonesty before the sentence ended. Did your mother stay in contact with Elliot? Rachel did not answer. Rachel, you're asking the wrong question. That frightened me more than yes would have. What is the right one? Why did Mom believe him? I sat down at the kitchen table. She believed he wrote the story. She believed something happened that you did not remember. The room seemed to shrink around me. Rachel said Marlene met Elliot twice after he resigned. Once at a diner near Springfield, once in Columbus. Rachel drove her the second time because Marlene's eyesight had begun to fail. Why would she hide that from me? She tried not to. I would remember. Would you? That word had become a door people kept opening. Rachel told me to speak with a retired copy editor named Lois Kemp. Lois had worked the Sunday desk the weekend. I rewrote the Haven Street article. She lived in Kettering, surrounded by houseplants and old newspaper cartoons taped to her refrigerator. When I mentioned the unsigned draft, she stared at me for a long time. It was not unsigned, she said. Yes, it was. No, Elliot's name was on the first page. I never saw it. I know. How? Lois lowered herself into a chair. Because you brought the pages in without the first page. Lois said I arrived at the newsroom late Friday night, carrying a folder and smelling of bourbon. I had been drinking heavily that year. I called it unwinding because alcoholics prefer verbs that sound temporary. Marlene and I were fighting. My son had dropped out of college. My father was dying in a nursing home and no longer knew my name. None of that excused anything. It only described the room I had built inside myself. You said Elliot gave you the file, Lois told me. He didn't. No, he left it at your house. A memory stirred. Elliot at my kitchen table. Rain against the window. A yellow folder between us. He had asked me to read the draft because he did not trust himself to finish it without anger. I said I would. Then we drank, not together for long. Elliot left after one beer. I stayed. Lois said the pages I brought to the office were marked in both our handwriting. Whole paragraphs were Elliot's. Transitions were mine. Quotes were his. The ending was mine. You acted like it was your draft, she said. Did you question me? I asked where Elliot's byline was. What did I say? She looked ashamed, though the shame belonged mostly to me. You said he had lost his nerve and given you the story. The first twist did not arrive like a blow. It arrived like anesthesia wearing off. Elliot had not stolen my work. I had taken his reporting during a weekend I could barely remember, convinced myself we had agreed to it, and later accused him when he demanded his name back. Why didn't you tell the publisher? I asked. Lois looked toward the window. Elliot asked me not to. Why? He said the story mattered more than the byline. Then he said exposing you would cause another kind of damage. What damage? Lois shook her head. That part was not mine to tell. I knew where I had to go next. Not to the hotel. To Haven Street. The youth center had closed years earlier. The building now housed a plumbing supply company. But the attorney who represented former residents still practiced in Dayton. Her name was Camille Ross. She remembered Elliot. She remembered me too. You got an award for that series, she said. I felt my face warm. I gave it back quietly. Quietly is how newspapers apologize when they hope nobody notices. I deserved that. Camille had kept the case files because several residents later sued the county. She could not show me confidential records, but she could answer one question after I explained why I was asking. What damage was Elliot protecting me from? She studied me. Do you remember your source? The former employee. That was one source. There was another? A resident. Elliot had interviewed a 17-year-old boy who spent 9 days in an isolation room. The boy described scratch paint, meals pushed through a slot, and staff turning off the hall light, so he could not tell whether it was day or night. His name had never appeared in print. Camille said, Elliot promised the boy nobody would know he spoke. I never knew who he was. Yes, you did. She opened a file, removed nothing, and placed both hands on the closed cover. The boy was your son, Andrew. I laughed once because my mind rejected the sentence. Andrew had spent that summer with friends, or so I believed. He was 19, not 17. Camille corrected me gently. He had been picked up for sleeping in an abandoned building after dropping out of college. He gave a false age. Haven Street took him temporarily while his identity was sorted out. Marlene knew, Camille said. Andrew called her. She asked Elliot to help without telling you. My mouth went dry. Why not me? According to Elliot, Andrew said you would turn his worst week into a lesson about character. That sounded like the man I was. Camille leaned back. Elliot did not defend his authorship because doing so meant explaining how he had access to Andrew's account. Your son begged him to keep the promise. The article was Elliot's. The silence was for Andrew. Andrew lived in Arizona by then. We had not been estranged exactly. We had practiced something more polite. Birthday calls. Weather. Work. No past tense. When I phoned, he answered while driving and asked if he could call back. I said, I know about Haven Street. The road noise stopped. He must have pulled over. Who told you? Camille Ross. A long breath. Is Elliot in Dayton? Yes. That means he is sick. I did not ask how Andrew knew. He told me Elliot had remained in contact with him for years. Not constantly. A phone call when Andrew got sober. A card when he married. Another after his first child was born. You talked to him, but not me? I talked to you. You know what I mean. Yes, Andrew said. I do. I waited. He said, Dad, you did not know how to hear bad news without making it about what it said about you. The sentence was not cruel. That made it harder to escape. Your mother wanted to tell you, he continued. I stopped her. Why? Because after the article came out, you were proud, really proud. For once you were not disappointed in yourself. Mom said we should wait until the lawsuit was finished. And then you accused Elliot. After that, telling you meant destroying him or destroying you. We kept choosing later. I asked why Elliot took the blame publicly. Andrew was quiet. He did not take all of it. What does that mean? He had left his reporting at your house while you were drinking. He broke his promise to me by putting my words where you could find them. Even without my name, you recognized details about our family. I had not. Or perhaps some part of me had and looked away. Andrew said, Elliot believed he caused everything by trusting you before you were trustworthy. There it was again. No innocent man and guilty man. Two friends, each protecting the version of himself he could still live with. Will you come to Dayton? I asked. No. The answer came quickly. Then he softened. But I think you should see Elliot. Elliot opened his hotel door, wearing my Navy suit. It hung loose on him. He had cancer. Pancreatic. He told me after we sat down. He had come to Dayton for a clinical consultation and had not planned to tell anyone except Andrew. The awards dinner was being held in the same hotel, which explained the suit. A former colleague had invited him without knowing our history. You look terrible, I said. He smiled faintly. You always did edit toward understatement. I placed his gray jacket across the chair. Marlene repaired the pocket. Yes. When? 1998. I met her in Columbus. She wanted me to come home and tell you everything. Why didn't you? Because Andrew asked me not to. Because I was angry. Because leaving it started to feel like proof I was a better man. That honesty brought more relief than an apology would have. I told him what Lois said, what Camille said, what Andrew said. Then I said the sentence I had rehearsed badly in the elevator. I stole your story. Elliot looked toward the window. You finished it. That is not the same. No, I ruined your name. I helped. How? He rubbed his thumb over the seam of my suit sleeve. The second twist came quietly. The unsigned draft had not been intended for publication. Elliot had removed names, dates, and one disputed claim because he was still verifying the account. I restored details from memory and pushed it into print before the county could move Andrew or erase the records. The article was accurate, but my recklessness forced the investigation before Elliot believed Andrew was emotionally ready. He tried to kill himself 2 days after publication. Elliot said, I stopped breathing. He never told me. He told Marlene and me. That is why we kept you away from the whole truth. He believed your pride had taken his pain and turned it into your triumph. No crime, no conspiracy, just a father who had used his son's suffering without knowing it was his, and a friend who let himself be hated because the boy had already survived enough. Elliot died 4 months later. Before he did, Andrew came home. The three of us met in my kitchen, where the story had begun 16 years earlier. No yellow folder, no bourbon, just coffee, untouched sandwiches, and long pauses nobody rushed to fill. Andrew was 41. Elliot looked 80. I felt older than both of them. I was ashamed, Andrew said. That is why I kept the lie alive. Elliot shook his head. It was not your lie. It became mine. I said, and mine. We did not divide guilt fairly. There was no fair way to do it. I apologized to Andrew for using his pain before I knew it belonged to him, and for being the kind of father who made anonymity feel safer than home. He did not forgive me immediately. I am grateful for that. Quick forgiveness can feel like another way of asking the hurt person to take care of everyone else. Elliot and I spent our last months talking by telephone, sometimes about Haven Street, more often about old deadlines, bad headlines, and the night a squirrel got into the newsroom and shut down the city desk. He asked me to speak at a journalism class after he was gone. Tell them the byline is not the most important name in a story, he said. What is? The name you promised not to use. Andrew came to hear me speak. Afterward, we ate at a diner near campus. He told me about his children. I listened without turning anything into advice. That sounds small. For me, it was work. The wrong suits were returned to their owners. I still have the dry cleaning receipt. Not displayed. Not framed. It sits in a desk drawer with tax papers and spare batteries. As ordinary as the afternoon it entered my life. Sometimes I look at Elliot's name and think about how many years I spent believing I had been betrayed. I had been, just not by him alone. Memory had betrayed me. Pride had helped. Love had kept quiet until quiet became its own injury. Andrew calls now without needing a holiday. We still lose our way sometimes. But we no longer pretend silence means nobody is lost.